Okay, people are wondering, is Joe Biden going to actually step down, or is he going to continue to give his own party the middle finger? Donald Trump survives an assassination attempt. Now people are mocking him for having a bandaged ear. The RNC is wrapping up. To help me go through some of the biggest news stories today, I have comedian JP Sears. JP, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, you're welcome, Stephen. I appreciate being on with you and love your work, brother.
So I've been a fan of yours since before COVID. And if I didn't say hello to you from my wife, Casey, I'll probably be in the doghouse later. She's the one that turned me on to your work. And I just loved your sarcasm and your humor. Your first video that really caught me was you have a video about YouTube and their content guidelines and community guidelines. And at the time, I was trying not to talk about COVID and lose my channel. And your stuff was like, it was so spot on. It was just absolutely hilarious. And that's when I was like, okay, I gotta follow this guy. And I've been a big fan of yours ever since.
Oh, thank you, man. That we were in the trenches together, like literally fighting for our YouTube lives, which is such a blessed first world problem to have. But congratulations for surviving at least the COVID onslaught of deplatforming from YouTube. And I'm sure we'll have another wave of community guidelines that nobody really knows about coming at us sometime pretty soon.
Yeah, it turns out the government just loves to control what we say. And, comedians, I think more than anybody, have been under attack. And it's like, I think everybody knows when you go to a comedy show, there's going to be, not normal conversations. And it's okay to make fun of society. It's okay to make fun of ourselves. If we take ourselves and humanity too serious, I think it actually leads to a pretty boring life. I wanted to jump in on a question with you. So I wanted to get your reaction. I know that you're a fan of RFK Jr., just like I am. You're also a fan of Donald Trump, just like I am. What was your first reaction or thoughts when you saw the breaking news that he had been shot at that rally in Butler, Pennsylvania?
Yeah, denial is the first stage of grief. And that was honestly my first reaction watching the footage. And thank God, I do think it's from the grace of God that President Trump is still alive. A 1 or 2 degree angle change in his head tilt changes the whole scenario. And, seeing a head blow up probably makes things more believable. But the fact that from the grace of God, it was just a wound to his ear, and the shooter being 150 yards away, obviously his gun wasn't mic'd up. It's 450 feet from actual microphones. Even the sound of the gunfire didn't seem real because it was relatively faint. Just that's the reality of capturing audio. So I was in denial for probably 10 minutes. I'm like, yeah, what? Maybe someone had like a pellet gun and got him with that. But then when it starts to set in of, no, this was a real assassination attempt. And I have goosebumps right now thinking about this. My first thought was just sadness, because I'm imagining this man who is a great man. He's a husband, he's a father, he's a grandfather, and happens to be beloved by hundreds of millions of people. I just felt sad because I'm automatically thinking about what if they actually were successful with this. That just made me sad. And then I go into, then we're probably in a civil war. Like, our lives might be very different today, a handful of days later, if they got them. And then, honestly, the last thing I'll say on that, and I think the predominant ethos of the crowd is what at least I felt. I think a lot of people there was just this weird divine feeling of peace. you look at the crowd and then the aftermath. There's been no riots. Of course, we're asking questions, but there was just this, I don't know. I think the grace of God, and of course, Trump iconically standing up, that I think that really, I don't even think he strategically meant to do that. I think it was pure emotion. I think that's who he is. I think God was also working through him. But I think that really registered in my psychology of like, he assured us he's okay. And a lot of us see him as a symbol of what our future in this country can be like. So it was this like, okay, what happened was not okay, but things are weirdly okay, because he, just like you're showing right now, that was the reassurance that I think helped put a lot of people into a relative place of peace. Of course, we need to be bold, we need to be fierce, we need to think for ourselves, but hopefully peacefully. So, and I could say a lot more, but that was just the gist of it. I mean, so many different emotions and scenarios going through my mind.
Yeah, no, I was the same way. I was like, I literally felt my heart sink into my butt. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, am I going to have to go live and tell people the president has been assassinated? Because at this point, all I knew was that he was shot, right? So I was driving home from a birthday party. I told my wife, you've got to switch seats with me so that I can get on Twitter. And she said, I've been Googling. I can't find anything. I said, you got to get on Twitter. It's so much faster,
Yeah.
And so I switched over, and then I read that he's alive and he's okay. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is absolutely crazy. But you're right. Just like the fact that this, how everything played out was just so crazy to me. I actually want to react to something with you. I don't know if you've seen this or not, but they did a computer rendering of the exact movements of his head. And you can see he looks up at that immigration file, and all of a sudden that little poof that we hear in the microphone goes right past his ear. And then he puts his hand up, and the next bullet goes right between his hands and gets him in the ear.
I didn't know the second bullet went between.
Yeah, and then he leans back and it goes right past his eyebrow, and that's when he drops to the ground. Pretty crazy when you actually see like that first one. Really, I mean, it went right past his ear, and he's talked about in interviews that he heard something, and that's what alerted him. And he puts his hand up, and it goes right in between, shoots right through the ear. But then that's what gets him to fall this way. And they miss again with the third one. I mean, like, you watch that over and over again in slow motion. It's like one little movement of the head was the difference between us reporting on a JFK-like situation and what appears to many to be some kind of a miracle.
Man, I believe in God. I believe in miracles. I think people's awareness of miracles is the only thing in question. What we just saw, that's a miracle. If you line up 100 people in that scenario, how with those 3 shots fired in succession like that, how many of those 100 walk away? It would surprise me if it's more than the one.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. I saw this online. That now Biden is trying to recreate recreate that situation if he could. Maybe pick up some more votes. Maybe it's too soon. He's got COVID. Maybe we shouldn't make fun of
that's his triumph over COVID. Speaking of which, Stephen, did you see it's going around the I believe MSNBC's Useful Idiot, and I say that not as a judgment, but just to observe her role in society. But Joy Reid, did you see her comments comparing the Trump survival of a bullet to the potential of which by the way, it unfortunately is an if Biden survives COVID? It's the same, isn't it? Yeah. It's like, okay, Joy, may we go through some numbers? Millions of people got COVID, survival rate of 99.98%, and those 0.02% that didn't die, they have an average of 4 comorbidities. So if you had a choice, would you rather survive a bullet or COVID? Hard choice, right, Joy? Because it is kind of the same thing. Not at all. Like, millions of people got COVID. Not millions of people survived. Not millions of people survived taking a bullet. Just, good God, how she thinks we're as dumb as she is. It is just weird.
Yeah, I think Don Jr. summed it up. He said, these people with Trump derangement syndrome, it wasn't enough that he was shot in the head. He wasn't shot enough in the head for them. And it's like, it's sad that he even has to say that, and his granddaughter speaking at the RNC was like, this is my grandpa. Like, why would someone do that? He calls me at school to check on me. He sneaks me extra soda. He makes me laugh, like, I think it maybe brought the humanity back to Trump, where people go, okay, wait a minute. Joe Biden is this character that we're all worried about, the future of our country. Trump is this character, but at the end of the day, it's like they're both human. And I don't wish ill on Biden, even with COVID. Like, I hope he gets through the whole thing or whatever, but like, I don't know, just like now they're mocking him for having a bandage on his ear. They're saying that he's being overly dramatic with his injuries. It's like, his ear got blown off. Like, it's crazy.
Joy Reed's comment. She had another video, just a selfie video, really suggesting the assassination was staged. And it's like, oh, what's that with that bandage on Trump's ear? We haven't even gotten reports about what the injury is. It's like, it was a bullet wound, Joy. What, do you think he fractured a hip in his ear? And talking about, like, why haven't they released why hasn't the New York Times got his medical records? You mean, why hasn't the New York Times violated HIPAA laws? It's just, and also, Stephen, to your point, it sickens me. I've seen tons of videos of people who do suffer from the sective mental illness called Trump derangement syndrome. It is a mental illness. It's your mind being invaded by something other than your own thoughts generated by your own mind. Mass formation is a hell of a drug. And it is sickening to see people say they wish this human being would have died. And I think for any awakened person, a freedom-loving person, a true American, we know that actually praying for our enemies is a good thing. I pray for the well-being of Joe Biden. I pray for the well-being of the Bill Gates, the Anthony Fauci's. I don't pray that they're successful in their agendas. I pray for the healing of their hearts, whether it was they weren't held enough as children or whatever it was that made them gravitate towards an accumulation of power that violates the Constitution and the human rights of others. I pray that that's healed in them. And I think praying for our enemies is a very good virtue of humanity, but it also helps us. Like, if they're healed and made whole and have more connection to their heart and hopefully a connection to a higher power, we win.
Yeah. You'll appreciate this as a comedian, but it kind of reminds me of Fiddler on the Roof, where the people are gathered around the rabbi and they say, "Rabbi, is it true that we can pray for everyone, even our enemies?" And he says, "Yes, it's true." And they say, even the czar? He says, "Yes." And they say, "Can you give us an example?" He says, "May the Lord keep and bless him far away from us." Like, just that little pause, far away from us. It's like, yes, I don't want Biden, to die from COVID or anything, but I'm praying he makes the decision to step down for the good of the country.
And I think that's the good of him. I mean, we all, but a lot of us look at it. What's going on is elderly abuse. It is certainly not in the country's best interest. That matters. how is that possibly in his best interest? How is that nurturing him as a human with where he's at in his stage of chronological age, but more so like biological age and just where his mind and physiology is at?
Yeah. Do you think he will step down, or do you think he will stubbornly push his way to the finish line on November 5th?
Yeah, I'll give you two answers. My straightforward answer that I've had for 3 years or 3.5 years is I think right now they're just doing the playbook. In the playbook that is playing out that I was seeing, a lot of people were seeing as well, is obviously like 2020, he wasn't believable that he was functional, but they did it anyway. And then obviously there's more decline. Then they put him in front of a camera for long form content, starting with a debate. And we're not seeing anything new. We're just having more exposure time to see what is, instead of like a 20-second clip on social media. Now the America, who probably doesn't follow who you and I follow on Twitter, exposing this. Now the rest of the country is seeing it with the belief, because, cut to post debate in lockstep, all the mainstream media is now giving people permission to think, oh, he's maybe unfit. So let's just say the plan has been to throw Biden under the bus, replace him at the last minute with a white knight, Gavin Newsom, whoever. They want it to look real, not orchestrated. So if they just said, hey, Biden's unfit, and Joe says, okay, yeah, I'll step down, that doesn't look real. You need drama and conflict, like to make movies or plays look more realistic. There's always drama and conflict. So I think Joe resisting it, personally, I think that's just been part of the playbook. I think that's orchestration. And, then just sort of coincidentally, a couple days ago, Biden says, the only way I drop out is if I get diagnosed with a medical condition. Now he's got COVID. They consider that to be a legit medical condition. Will that be the impetus? And I just read this morning, like top Democrats are saying Biden's going to step down, at least from the race this weekend. That wouldn't surprise me. It would just be in accordance with what I've thought is going to happen. I thought they actually would have waited a little closer to November. I know they've got their timeline with the DNC convention, but then the only footnote is with what I will say is their failed assassination of Trump, attempt on Trump. We saw the miracle from the, I'll call it a most likely a coordinated effort to take Trump out. He wasn't supposed to live through that. It was only through the grace of God that he did. And they say, if you come for the king, get the king, or else he is just stronger than ever. So the footnote on Biden stepping out, Saturday, I could see a world where what happened on Saturday changes that, where now Trump is not 5 points ahead. He's 25 points ahead. So maybe they say, we're not going to waste our 2028 candidate on Trump. Like, can we beat him even with potential irregularities? If they deem him unbeatable, then maybe they just have Biden stay in to lose. But also at the same time, as second footnote, Stephen, then I'm going to shut up. I pray it's all unsuccessful. Yet I don't think this will be the only attempt on Trump's life. And if that's true, and I hope it's not true, but if it's true, then it does make sense that they would want a stronger candidate just in play. So if, the surprising thing happens that they've already tried, why wouldn't they try it again? Because they've shown a lot of their hand. It makes sense that they would also want a stronger candidate. So, Stephen, if I had to, just put $10 into the middle of the table, yes, I do think Biden will be pulled out. Curious your thoughts as here we stand today.
Yeah. If I was in charge of the deep state, which doesn't exist,
Of course not.
Except for in reality, I would say, you know what? We're not going to get rid of Donald Trump. Why don't we just put our plan of destroying America on hold? And let's just let him get through. He can only have 4 years. Yeah. And then we'll pick back up in 2028 and we'll start grinding the middle class into the ground. We'll leave the lower income families desolate. The rich will get richer, the poor will get poorer. We'll continue to flood the country with, people from socialist countries that we think that we can control better. I mean, that's what I would do if I was the deep state, but I'm not, because I'm not evil. I think that they know that they're cooked. I think that too many people are waking up. It's the same thing. And maybe you had this where I was more and more red pilled the more the COVID lockdowns went on, 100%. Where I had extra time on my hands. Before this, I did retirement planning for people. I was looking at numbers and math and financial stuff. I wasn't paying attention. And then all of a sudden I was like, okay, I got to pay attention to the government. And I was shocked. I was like, wow, oh my gosh, we've got a lot of really corrupt leaders. And then it was like, well, what if I shared the news just from a really suspicious libertarian point of view? And that's when the channel really started taking off, was just connecting with the American people saying, hey, something doesn't feel right to me. How about you? Here's a whole bunch of information and sources to back that up. And people were, they started being red pilled at the same time as I was. Were you always kind of a conservative thinker, or were you more liberal? What was your journey to where you are now?
Yeah. Well, by the way, what you said during COVID, getting me to wake up, same, exact same. Honestly, before COVID, I'm not proud to say it, but it's true. So I'll say it. I couldn't even tell you one difference between a Democrat and a Republican. I paid no attention to politics. But looking back, how I kind of navigated the world, what I thought, I can look back and say, well, yeah, that was more liberal, never far left communist, but it was more liberal. And then as COVID woke me up to do more of my own thinking, like I haven't watched the news since maybe 2004. I lived without a TV for most of my adult life. And because I've known that the news is just propaganda, it's owned by a couple small companies and it's just mind control. But even at that, I was realizing there are thoughts in my head that aren't my own. So early COVID, it woke me up to a lot of the evil stuff in the government, corrupt people. It helped me wake up to like, oh, President Trump, when I look at what he does, I like it. Before that, I was never like, oh, Trump's evil. But I'm like, well, I guess he's a little racist. And, maybe Russia, did he? Well, what happened there?
Yeah.
But so some of that got into my head. I'm not proud of it, but it got past my immune system. So yeah. And now, it just for the sake of conversation, it's easier to say I'm a conservative, but really at heart, the libertarian principles are what are truest for me. And it's just like, how like your politics may not have changed, but the political parties have just slid, what used to be a liberal. Now, a lot of them are like, well, I guess I'm a conservative now. Like, why are you free speech is wrong? What's wrong with you? Well, it's communism. It's not liberalism. So I think a lot of people who would be voting conservative and like identifying as a conservative, it's just because the polarities have like stretched out or stretched to the left at least. But when I look at some of the conservative stuff, it's like, yeah, I'm not doing the groupthink thing on that. Like I don't like that. I'll keep thinking for myself. But keeping government small, keeping the government as something that serves the people rather than it using the people to serve itself. The libertarian principles at heart are what I can see. That's really what resonates as the cleanest.
Are you still there?
Whoop. Sorry, Stephen. I think we had a little disconnect. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. I know you're dealing with a thunderstorm there. So can you hear me?
Yep, coming through a little scratchy. Okay. I'm sure it's an issue on my end, but I, as of now, can hear you well enough.
I just have a weird voice. You know what's been really interesting to watch publicly is, you mentioned the parties have shifted and a lot of people have stayed the same. I've been really fascinated by watching Elon Musk. I've also been really fascinated in watching Bill Maher, comedian Bill Maher, right?
Yeah.
And the major difference I see between them, other than like $249 billion, is Elon Musk doesn't have Trump derangement syndrome. And Bill Maher does. And Bill Maher will at least admit that. But every now and then, Bill Maher, he says something so common sense. I'm like, oh my gosh, this guy, he is about to be red pilled. Like, he is saying things that I wish Republican leaders would say. And then he'll say something really stupid because he hates Donald Trump so much. And so anyway, I'm just watching these two going, wow, Trump derangement syndrome is probably keeping a lot of people from having their eyes fully opened or them fully awakened, as you say.
Yeah, I agree. And Bill Maher's an interesting case study. First off, I think he has a very important voice, because it's one thing for someone on the right to be calling out wokeness and the absurdities of what's going on, getting your children's genitals surgically altered, believing you're helping them. So I love how Bill Maher calls that out, because he would tell you, I'm on the left. So I think it's important for people who might be a little on the brainwash side to hear it from their own. Otherwise, it's just like if just people on the right are calling this out, you don't even consider it. It's like, that's the enemy. Of course, the enemy is saying that. But when you hear people on your own side start to wake up and change their tune, I think that's really powerful. I do. And then what else, as you mentioned, what else makes Bill Maher so fascinating is he can be speaking straight common sense, sound like he's almost speaking at the RNC, and then eyes glazed over. And Trump is just evil. Why is that, Bill? He just is.
Yeah.
Man, and if you know anything about brainwashing, you realize for 8 years, a 24/7 news cycle with these multinational corporations that they're literally doing brainwashing. They're doing fear inductions and then giving you the post-hypnotic suggestion. Trump's bad. He's like Hitler. Here's the bad things he does, put you under a fear response. And the next thing you're told, your mind is just more susceptible to be invaded. So it makes a lot of sense that people have Trump derangement syndrome, Bill Maher included, where you can have a brilliant person, high IQ, they think for themselves independently, and then the jabs come up, eyes glazed over, and it's like something else it has taken over.
Yeah. I think you make a good point. Some people have to hear it from their own side, because, like, imagine if Donald Trump was like, it's crazy that we're cutting off genitals. There would literally be people that hate Trump so much, they're like, now I've got to chop off my genitals just to get back at this orange-faced loser, But then Bill Maher says it and they go, oh, yeah, we're doing that to children? Yeah. That seems really crazy. Like, they can't even rent a car, and we're letting them change their gender, mix up their entire hormones, scatter their brain, chemistry, and then castrate themselves. Yeah, maybe I should look into whether there's some truth to that, or whether that's good or evil, right?
Yeah. And man, yeah, it's important. It's like if I see negative things written about me online, it does not matter to me. I do not get stressed out. A lot of times I just get amused by it if I see it. But if I have a close friend of mine talking about a blind spot, like, hey, JP, there's something about you, your life, what you're saying. I think you might have a blind spot. Can I share it with you? I say, absolutely, because I trust that person. Not that I recommend outsourcing trust to, a talking head like Bill Maher, yet there's people who would consider him to be in their inner circle of influential people. And it just hits different than if someone you don't like or you don't trust is telling you the same message.
Yeah, I agree. Well, and I feel the same way about like Joe Rogan, right? It's been interesting to watch his journey as he's had guests on where they point out his blind spot and he's like, oh gosh, I'm gonna have to really think about that, where he does his research and then next thing you know, he's like, okay, wait a minute. Some of the stuff the Biden administration is doing is absolutely crazy, like pretending like high gas prices don't hurt people, pretending like, grocery bills going up doesn't hurt 50 million Americans that are living paycheck to paycheck. He's also been a fun comedian / podcaster to follow. It's like watching people awaken, your theme in real life. It's like, oh wow, it's kind of fun to watch over the course of a couple of years.
I agree. How fascinating is that? And by the way, what a powerful model of curiosity. I think Joe Rogan's greatest contribution, it's not like any one particular thought that you get from him or a guest of his, even though there's so much great stuff to consider, but it's how he models curiosity, open-minded thinking, a willingness to question himself, a willingness to question others. And he models that oftentimes for 3 hours at a time. Honestly, a lot of us grew up not having a role model that modeled curiosity and critical thinking. And I think Rogan is such a great balance of holding boundaries and opening boundaries of his mind, where, you can get some people, they're talking to an influential person. The influential person says, here's how it is. And the interviewer says, okay, yeah. That's okay. I didn't know that. That's how it is. Rogan doesn't do that. He'll push back, but he'll also receive and consider. And I think that's been a great service to the world.
Yeah. Let's go back to Biden. He's, been vaccinated 5 or 6 times against COVID. The FDA is literally recommending your 9th booster at this point. I don't want to make light of COVID because I know it did affect people. I also believe it was a lot of theater. I personally got Delta COVID back to back and did get some health issues from it, but I did not end up getting the vaccine. What were your thoughts on as revelation came out about Dr. Fauci being the one that literally paid for them to make this mega virus? It then leaks, and then he puts himself at the head of the group to investigate. It's like, the Warren Commission, where most likely, the Dulles guy who was fired by JFK had an involvement in his assassination, and then gets himself at the top of the Warren Commission to investigate. What were your thoughts on everything coming out about Fauci, the way that they were manipulating us through social media? Your thoughts on all of that?
I admire Fauci. I think he's a hell of a guy. I think he's just gotten so much baseless conspiracy claims against him. He's responsible for so many people being alive today. Stephen, I want more Fauci. I wish he was back as the head of the NIH. I trust him. Man.
Now that we're past the YouTube algorithm.
Just get in there. Censors, if you're listening, we're on board with your narrative.
Yeah.
Man, none of it surprised me because, like, before things became overtly obvious, there were these these murmurings. They try to suppress them online, but like the truth was coming out pretty early. What surprises me is how obvious it all is. I mean, just like you mentioned, like the Warren Commission, that's a perfect analogy for it. It is so obvious. By the way, you look at the movie The Dallas Buyers Club, what happened with AIDS and AZT. You watch the RFK Jr. documentary, and you realize, well, this is not the first time this evil dude has done this. So unfortunately, nothing surprising. It's just so obvious. And then I also wonder if the best place to hide things at times is in plain sight, where it's so obvious that these lines of corruption are in place that it almost gives you plausible deniability, where it's just kind of like, well, if we were doing those negative things, why would he be the head and, doing all this stuff? So it's just so obvious. And the only place they hid it was in plain sight.
Yeah. A good example of that is I remember just so many people saying to me, like, I really dodged a bullet. I got the asymptomatic COVID, almost as if I didn't have it because I had zero symptoms. And yet, now we're learning that these PCR tests, where there was literally billions of tests done showing that people had it, and then now they're like, oh yeah, those are incredibly unreliable. Like even the creator of them's like, oh, why are you guys using these tests? They're so unreliable. But do you remember meeting people that were like, oh my gosh, I got the asymptomatic, like I have zero symptoms.
Yeah. I remember tons of that. And I remember, in the early days, I mean, most of my inner circle were like, we're not doing COVID, guys. We don't believe this. We don't believe the fear mongering of it. But there were still people in my life like, well, we're going to take a test. We're going to do the PCR test before we come to the gathering just to make sure. And we want everybody else to as well. Like, well, that's not going to happen. But yeah, just it's like having a cement block. You're cool. You're going swimming. You don't know how to swim. So I'm going to hold on to a cement block to make sure I'm safe. Well, this thing is proven to not give you any buoyancy. It's not a flotation device. The inventor of the PCR test coming out and just, yeah, this doesn't detect viruses. This is not accurate. It just makes me wish the people that are out to deceive the public, it makes me wish they were more creative and would treat people as though they're more intelligently. Show a little respect when you're trying to manipulate and deceive people.
Yeah. Well, I've been disappointed that Fauci hasn't been held more accountable. I mean, there's just so much evidence against him. Yeah. But what do I know? I can't remember the last time someone in government was actually held responsible for hurting millions of people.
Yeah, well, I think Fauci is the first one, Stephen, that's not being held responsible. You're a little conspiratorial there. But yeah, and I also remind myself and I encourage people, don't put your peace of mind into someone like Fauci being held accountable in a court of law or through official proceedings, because you're outsourcing your peace of mind. Let him be accountable to yourself. Know who he is and know that's that's what really matters. And of course, I think in the court of public opinion, he's been found guilty. And the other saving grace is, well, we want him to be punished accordingly. I do too. But also remember, he has to live with himself. That's got to be a hell of a punishment. And I think ultimately who holds someone like Fauci accountable is our creator. Like, I believe in some way, shape, or form, we're all having to be held accountable. So I don't think Fauci is any different. It would be great to see him really be tried truthfully for what he's done. But I don't think that's going to happen, quite honestly.
Yeah, I don't either. But you know, if nothing else, I think a lot of people woke up. I know your theme is awakening, and I've seen a lot of people awaken. And I think it's shown that there are way more conservative thinkers than most of us would have guessed.
Yeah.
I think there's way more people that love America than we would have guessed. So it's been really interesting to watch. Well, I know you've got a full day ahead of you. I want to be respectful of your time. I've been wanting to have you on the show, and so I was in Vegas at a mastermind, and someone said, "Hey, I'm friends with JP. I bet I can get him on your show." I was like, yes, please. I would love to meet this guy and have a conversation. If people want to follow you online, see the world through your funny perspective and sarcasm, where can I point them? How can I push some people towards you?
Yeah, my website, it's the hub of everything. All my latest videos, they're linked directly through my website, awakenwithjp.com. Also have my stand-up tour schedule on there. And of course, you can find me on YouTube and all the social medias, just Awaken with JP. And if you find me incredibly offensive, then the best place online to avoid is awakenwithjp.com.
Okay. Yeah, that is great. Yep. If I offend you, then just avoid me. That's a great answer. All right. Well, it's been great to be with you, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Stephen. Appreciate you having me on, and I appreciate the relentless common sense that you're sharing with the world. I think you are a fantastic force of awakening. So, brother, it's been an honor, and keep doing what you're doing.
Oh, thank you so much.